Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to completely demystify the American legal system. You hear terms like lawsuit, prosecution, and acquittal thrown around in the news literally every single day. But the actual underlying machinery driving those outcomes, it's rarely explained clearly. So we're going to break down exactly how this system operates, and spoiler alert, it runs on two completely different parallel tracks. Ever wonder how someone can be found not guilty of a crime, but still ordered to pay millions over the exact same event? Okay, let's dive into this. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by defining these two worlds of law, followed by the burden of proof, and then damages versus prison time. After that, we'll see what happens when both worlds collide, and we'll wrap up by tackling the big question: what about double jeopardy? I promise, learning these basic building blocks first is going to reward you with a totally fascinating legal plot twist at the end. All right, Section 1, Two Worlds of Law, Establishing the Baseline. The fundamental premise you really need to understand here is that the legal system is not just one giant monolith. Actually, it's composed of two entirely distinct parallel universes. Let's look at the first one, civil law. This pertains to the duties that exist between persons or between persons and their governments. Notice the focus here. This side of the law is generally all about private disputes, right? It's about individuals fixing harm done to them or their property. If someone breaches a contract with you or, say, damages your car, you are the one bringing the suit to be made whole again. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the major shift in perspective. Criminal law is defined as a wrong against society proclaimed in a statute and, if committed, punishable by society. So a crime isn't just a wrong against an individual. It's literally considered an offense against society as a whole. And that's exactly why the victim doesn't prosecute the case themselves. Instead, a public official, like a district attorney or an attorney general, steps in to represent the state. Moving on to Section 2, the burden of proof, tilting the scales. Because these are two totally different legal realms, they are governed by highly specific rules of gravity. In civil law, the standard is a preponderance of the evidence. Think of it like a pile of feathers on a scale. It essentially means more likely than not. You just have to tip the scales slightly. Even 51% certainty is enough to win. But in criminal law, the state has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the anvil. The prosecutor must prove every single essential element of the offense to an incredibly high bar. If the jury views the evidence as reasonably permitting either a guilty or a not guilty verdict, they absolutely must acquit. And we can see exactly how that heavier burden plays out once you're inside the jury room. A civil verdict typically only requires a 3/4 majority of jurors to agree, but a criminal verdict, that requires unanimous agreement by all members of the jury. A single doubting juror can entirely prevent a guilty verdict. You see, the system is intentionally designed to make a criminal conviction incredibly difficult. Which brings us to Section 3, damages versus prison time, the ultimate stakes. So why does the criminal system demand such unanimous agreement and a sky-high burden of proof? Well, it all comes down to the consequences. While civil cases generally end with one party paying compensatory damages, which is basically just a simple loss of money from the piggy bank to fix a harm, criminal sanctions are designed to rigorously punish and deter. As you can see, they include heavy fines, probation, community service, and most significantly, a profound loss of liberty through incarceration in a jail or prison. And in some cases, it includes the ultimate sanction, the death penalty. The stakes in criminal court aren't just your wallet, they're your freedom or even your life. And this brilliantly illustrates everything we've talked about so far. This master summary matrix is basically your ultimate cheat sheet. You can see the civil side over on the left, brought by the harmed person, decided by a preponderance of evidence, and aiming to compensate. Then on the right, the criminal side, brought by the state, requiring proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and aiming to punish. Take a really good mental picture of these cleanly separated columns because we are about to mix them together. Here we go. Section 4, when both worlds collide. The scenario. We've established our neatly separated tracks, but real life is rarely that tidy. What happens when these two completely parallel universes suddenly crash right into one another? Let me ask you, can one single act trigger both a civil lawsuit and a criminal prosecution? The answer is an absolute yes. Imagine a guy named Carlos. He's having a perfectly normal day, just minding his own business, when suddenly someone violently attacks him on the street, completely without provocation. Let's move to and see how this builds, because that single, unprovoked punch creates a massive legal earthquake in both universes at the exact same time. The physical attack on Carlos is simultaneously a tort, a civil wrong,
and a crime. On the civil side, Carlos can file a lawsuit against the assailant for assault and battery, demanding a court order for monetary damages to pay for his medical bills and his injuries. But simultaneously, on the criminal side, because the assailant violated a prohibitive statute, the state prosecutes the attacker, seeking fines or imprisonment. Two entirely separate trials, two entirely separate legal realms, all from one single unprovoked punch.
Finally, Section 5. What about double jeopardy?
Now, I know exactly what you might be thinking. How on earth is that allowed? Doesn't the Constitution protect us from being tried twice? Well, double jeopardy is a Fifth Amendment protection that prevents a person from being tried twice for the same criminal offense once they have been acquitted. I want you to pay very, very close attention to the word criminal in that definition. That single word is the absolute key to understanding this constitutional protection.
So, the crucial point is this: an acquittal in criminal court does not block a civil lawsuit. A person found not guilty by the state can absolutely still be sued for damages by the victim. Why? Because the burden of proof is completely different. The state might fail to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt unanimously. But Carlos, the victim, he might easily prove to 3/4 of a civil jury that it is more likely than not that the attacker caused his injuries. Basically, beating a criminal charge simply doesn't save you from a civil lawsuit. Which leaves us with this final thought. Knowing the vastly different stakes and burdens of proof, is it truly fair to face two completely different legal battles for one single mistake? It's a really heavy question to ponder. But by understanding the distinct mechanics of civil and criminal law, I guarantee you will never view the legal headlines exactly the same way again. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity sharp.